All right, welcome back to our fourth animation video here. In this video, I'm going to show you three very common techniques which are for textures and backgrounds. So our first effect here is this flickering background. Now you would have seen this used a lot in various videos. It's something that's widely used across mainstream videos, and it's almost described as this sort of stop motion sort of effect. So it's really quite simple to make, but I've put it in its own video because it is a really popular effect and it's something we're going to be using throughout this course. So I'm just going to right click, create a new composition here. This can be whatever you like. And I've supplied this file for you, texture, which you can just drag and drop straight in. You can scale this up and down to fit your composition. It doesn't really matter. But what we're going to do is I want to basically apply that stop motion effect. So it's where it's kind of jumping around the screen. Now, the previous videos, we looked at doing the posterized time effect. Now we can also apply that, but in an expression to the position. So let me show you what I mean. If I bring up my position here, I can hold Option or Alt and then click the stopwatch. That brings up the expression editor. And if I type posterize time, open bracket, I can set the number in here that I want to use for that posterized time. So in this case, I'm using 4. Now by itself, it doesn't actually do anything. And that's because it's not posterizing anything, right? It needs something to posterize. Just like we used the posterize effect before, we want to apply it to something, an adjustment layer that's affecting something underneath. So what we want to do is basically add a wiggle expression. So if I type wiggle, open bracket, so I'm going to type 2, and then 500. Now the first number is basically saying how fast or the speed in which I want to apply that effect. And the second number, 500, is the position. So what it's saying is I want to basically move this background layer 500 pixels at a speed of say 2. So if I dragged up on this or made this bigger, it would be moving it a lot further. And if I brought the front number up, it would be doing it a lot faster. So if I play through, you can see we're getting this effect. What we have to do here is we have to scale up on this layer so that when it moves around, it's moving within the frame that we've set. So for instance, if I doubled this, if I brought this number right up to say 20, it would be doing it a lot faster, right? And vice versa, if I brought this one up to 1,000, it would be moving that layer a lot more. Those numbers will be different depending on the background that you're using. So if you're using a different background, then those numbers will be different. But for this, I found that that's about right. The posterize is basically also giving it that sort of stop motion look. Now, another effect that I added over the top, which I've seen used a lot, is also a fractal noise. So what I can do is just create a new solid here. If I come up to effect, I can come down to noise and grain and I can add the fractal noise. Now the fractal noise is very similar, or it's pretty much the same as a turbulent displace, but with the fractal noise we can see it, so we can control the individual parameters. With the turbulent displace, you don't see this map, but it's essentially doing the same thing, right? So the only two numbers you want to mess around with here are these two, the contrast and the brightness. Now we would use the fractal noise for many different types of things, but in this case, I wanted to create a map that sort of sat over the top. So it kind of gives it this sort of cloudy look that sits over the top. And what I can do here is I can also set this to be multiply. So it makes it a bit more see-through, blends into the background. I can also scale this right up if I want more or less of that effect. And then again, we can use the evolution here to kind of create this interesting look over the top. I can alt click on this and then just add a little time function of time times 500. So then we've got this animation over the top. I can also hit T on the keyboard and dial this effect up or down. It just kind of gives this more interesting look to the background. It's something that I've seen used a lot in various videos. And now that you know how to do it, you'll start to see it a lot more in videos when you're watching them. All right, in the second effect, we're going to be creating this paper texture effect. This is very similar to that highlighter effect that we were using before. We're just doing it in a slightly different way. So I can start by creating a new composition. This time I want to add my paper background here, and I can scale this right down to fit my background. Then I can just create some new text here. And you can also apply that same background texture onto that layer. So if I take my background and duplicate and drag it above, then take that paper layer and set this to be the Luma matte of that paper layer. What that's doing is it's basically giving us a texture of the background. So you can see the texture is coming through on that layer. So that's something that I tend to do a lot. If I've got a textured background, I'll try and get my text or whatever to fit into the background. You can use the modes to do that, but I find that this is just another way of doing that. What I can do here is grab my rectangle tool and then make sure that my fill is on here. I don't want a stroke on this, and I can just draw out a rectangle here. Then I can change this to be multiply, just like we did with the other effect. And now I've got this effect sitting over the top. I can reposition this to get it to sit however you want. Now I want to animate this, so I can come down to the transform properties, create a scale keyframe here. If I move this anchor point over, now when I scale this up, it'll basically follow that anchor point. Make sure this is set to 0. And there we go. If I also select this, I can make it easy ease. Select the graph editor here and also add this I can add this smooth animation to that. I can also hit T on my keyboard. I'm going to bring down the opacity here to around sort of 25%. Now with that layer that I've got that animated, I can just duplicate that and I can off-center that next layer. So I kind of get this doubling up of this effect. I can do it again, and then I have this triple layer happening over the top. If I hit T on those, I can also bring up the opacity of the next one, and then with the top one, I can bring this all the way up. So we get that sort of, it's coming on at different layers basically. I can also bring my paper above that, so the highlighter now sits behind those layers. One other thing you can do here is also add an adjustment layer over the top. One other thing I can do is add the posterized time effect over the top. One other thing I can do is also bring this frame rate down like this. And now when I play through, I get this effect. I can even drag these out a little bit further. Now we have that sort of stop motion looking effect. One other thing I did over the top is I want to give this even more texture, or really bring that out. So you can add basically a noise effect over the top. So if I come up to effect, down to noise and grain, and I can add grain. Now the add grain, I have to change this to be final output to apply to my whole composition. And then I can scale up on the size and also the intensity here as well. So I can drag down on this to make it finer, or I can drag up to make it bigger. So that's something else that I also did in my original composition. The other thing with grain is that it is already pre-animated, so it starts animating. To stop that, you need to come down here to the animation settings and change this to be 0. So if you just want it to be solid and not animate, then that's how you do that. Otherwise, you can give it a small speed and it will animate that for you. All right, so the last effect we're going to make here is this dust and scratches effect. It's something that has also become very popular in mainstream media. So to do this, all I'm going to do is just right click, create a new composition. I'm going to create a new solid here, something quite dark. And then I want to add my transparent map over the top, which I've already supplied for you. I can hit S, scale this right down. Now this is just going to be my background, so it can be whatever you want. It doesn't have to be this. I've supplied these files for you. The other thing I can do is also come up to generate and down to fill. And now I can basically select a color of my map. So I like to just choose something a little bit lighter than my background here just to make it stand out. Now the way I made this dust effect, which sits over the top, is I generated it using a fractal noise. So I created a new solid here. It can be whatever color you want. So come up to effect, down to noise and grain, and then I add the fractal noise. Now at the moment it doesn't look like dust or scratches at all, so we need to go through and adjust the settings to really dial it down to a much smaller size. So the way we do this is we start dragging right up here on the contrast. I'm holding down Shift to really bring this up. Then I can bring the brightness right down. So now we've created those much finer little points. Another thing I can do is also scale this up or down. So this is a simple way of creating stars if I drag it all the way down. But if I could drag this up, maybe somewhere around here looks good. Then what I can do to animate it is I'm not going to use the evolution. I'm going to come down to the evolution options and I'm going to use the random seed. Now if I hit Option or Alt on the keyboard, I can create a function here or an expression. I'm going to use time times and then set this to be 4, and it creates this dust style effect. Now at the moment we can't see the background because it's black, so we want to basically only see the white parts. We don't want to see the black parts. So to do this, all I can do is just come down to the mode settings here and just change this to be screen. As you know from the original part of the course, we talk about blending modes. Screen is the one that removes the black and keeps everything else. So now we have that background. The other thing you can do is also come in here and just readjust anything. So if you want more or less of that effect, you can scale it up or down to get the effect that you're going for. The other thing you can do is also drag down on the contrast. So if you want less points, or you want more, or you want them more prominent, you can drag up and down on that and just mess around with that setting. But that's how you create it. It's a common effect used a lot in various videos. So that's it for this particular video. We've covered a few of the most popular techniques that you'll see in mainstream videos. If you have any questions on this particular video or any of the other videos in this course, then don't hesitate to let me know.